here with Nate Davis today, who is a professional screenwriter living out of Massachusetts. Nate, can you tell me where you from originally?
Massachusetts. I've pretty much, well, I was born in Maryland, but I've lived here since I was like 2 years old. And we almost moved away to LA a couple times. Different family things kept us here both times, and so we've always been here. And this is kind of where I've done everything from.
What was it like, kind of growing up in Massachusetts?
So I live in Western Massachusetts, and I grew up in a very rural area, in a town called Hatfield, with like 3,200 people, and we had the smallest school system in the state. So there were like 220 people in a school from grades 7 through 12, and my graduating class was like 32, 33 people. So it was very, very small, and like I did not fit in that well there. It was just very like, you know, very sports oriented, and I was a clumsy kid. I was very much like an artsy kid, and nerdy kid, and so I just didn't fit in well there at all. So it was not like the best environment for me in that way. But then I switched schools in 10th grade, and went to a much larger regional school, in another area, still in Western Massachusetts, but it was completely different, and like kind of my life changed completely because suddenly there were all sorts of kids like me there, and I very easily connected with a bunch of them. And that was a really great thing for me. And I don't know that I would have been encouraged to kind of keep doing this type of stuff had I not made that switch. So I'm really glad I did, and I'm really glad that I had parents who supported me, because we were still living in that same town then, but they kind of knew that I needed something else, and so switched schools, and that was a really life-changing thing. After high school, I took about a year off before I went back to any type of school. I started working full time right away, just to make ends meet. Um, and I started going to a community college, and I was working at a Blockbuster at the time. And that community college I was going to school for like small business or whatever. I wasn't even really sure what I wanted to do, but they offered a screenwriting course. And I had always done a lot of writing when I was younger. And then I got into music in my teens, and that had kind of taken a back seat. So I was like, well, that sounds fun. I'll do that. And just the combination of being surrounded by movies, working at a Blockbuster, and then taking this screenwriting course, it just clicked immediately. And I had written my first feature screenplay halfway through that semester. Like I was way ahead of all the assignments just because I was having so much fun doing it. And I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And so I really kind of immediately got into that. I spent like all of my savings on a mini DV camera and started like shooting music videos for friends' bands while writing. And that just took over my life.
That's so cool. Do you still have those music videos with you?
There, like a few of them are on YouTube, under like a completely different channel that I don't even know if I could log into it anymore. They're like just, old hardcore punk bands and things like that from 15 years ago. And, just me kind of trying to learn it. I gave up on the directing thing, at least for a while, because I realized like, well, we ended up having kids pretty young. And like, I was like, I can't learn two crafts, be a dad, work full time, and do all of those things at once. And so like, I was like, I'm going to focus on the writing thing, and that's what I'm going to focus on. Maybe I'll direct again someday, but like, I was happy to just focus completely on writing. And so far that's worked out all right for me.
That's really cool. You should tell your subscribers
I
about your
maybe
videos.
I don't know maybe that's old stuff. Like I usually hide the old stuff. Like nobody sees my old screenplays, and I'm not sure if I need people to see my old music videos. Maybe someday we'll see.
What did you decide to do after you got done at community college?
So I went to a 4-year school, UMass, for like a year after that. And I was still working full time, going to school full time, and now I'm writing, and like trying, like I'm like, this is what I want to do. And basically, I ended up dropping out of UMass because I was like, why am I going to incur all this debt? Like community college wasn't that expensive, but like UMass was just a different animal. And I'm like, why would I incur all this debt if I'm not even going to use this degree? Like I want to make movies. So I dropped out of school, and I really wish I hadn't done that. I think my life would have been easier if I had just spent another year and finished up that degree. But that's kind of the way that I went. I picked up a random job. One of my customers at Blockbuster like recruited me to work at a bank. And so I picked up a random job. It's basically kind of like a glorified teller in a grocery market bank. And that became my career because I always thought that was going to be my day job for like the next 2 years until I broke in and became this big Hollywood screenwriter at like 24 or whatever. But it didn't quite work out that way. And so I just kind of kept on like working my way up at the bank job. Again, we had kids pretty young, and that ended up becoming my career for a long time. And it ended up becoming a really good career. And I ended up having like a really good job, like, at a bank, as the years went on. So that's kind of what I did with my life while I was trying to be a writer all that time.
Can you talk a little bit about the time that you first sort of broke into Hollywood, like you've mentioned before on your channel?
Yeah. So that was like back in 2012. So I'd already been writing for a while. I'd been like writing screenplays for 7 or 8 years. And I was still living in Massachusetts. When I started out, I didn't have any connections, but because of the internet, this great gift of the internet, I was able to kind of connect with people online. And so I did connect with a few pro writers and things like that over those years. 7 or 8 years is a long time if you're like trying to write and also meet people at that same time. And over time, like I met people and was able to get good notes on my work and just kept writing and writing and writing and got better until when in like late 2011, early 2012, I finished a script called Aftermath, which, was one that suddenly all these people were like, hey, this is good enough. Like you could get repped off this. And I'm like, all right, let's go. I hadn't really done a lot of contests before. I think I'd entered the nickel twice out of all the scripts I'd written, and that was it. I did enter that into the nickel that year, and it didn't do anything, but it didn't matter because by that time, by the time those results came out in like August of 2012, I was already repped. I was already like had producers attached to Aftermath, and I already had an option along the way. And that happened because of cold queries. Like I just kind of went on IMDb Pro and found a bunch of managers' email addresses. There was also a spreadsheet going around at the time with a bunch of them. And I just fired off a ton of queries for Aftermath to as many people as possible. A couple managers really responded to it. They were both kind of on the fence. And I think part of that was because I was living in Massachusetts. So I was like, you know what, I'm not going to let this go. So I bought a ticket to LA. And then I emailed them and I said, hey, I'm going to be in town for some meetings, which wasn't true. I had nothing lined up, but I said, I'm going to be in town for some meetings and I'd love to meet with you. And so they took me up on that. And I ended up meeting with one of them and he signed me on the spot. And that was kind of where everything went from there.
Once you went out to Los Angeles, can you talk about sort of what happened next and what happened with Aftermath in that time period?
Yeah. So we attached Miller Goff to Aftermath to produce back then, did some development with their creative executive, who has gone on to have a really great writing career of his own, Matt Okamura, super cool guy. Then that went out to like all the major studios and everything, which was a really unnerving time. I drained the battery life on my phone so fast for those couple days, just like constantly refreshing everything. It went out and it didn't sell. Nothing happened. I got a bunch of generals out of it. So I went out to LA again. But like nothing happened at all. And so I booked a ticket to LA for like early October that year to take those generals. And then like the week before I left, I got a call from my manager and he was like, hey, I just got a call from Adi Shankar, who was the producer back then. I think Dread had just come out. I'm trying to remember what had come out by that point. Killing Them Softly might have been out already. But anyway, really, big, very legit producer. And he's like, he found Aftermath and he wants to option it. So I was like, cool. Now I'm going to LA and like, I have these generals, but also like, I just optioned a screenplay. So that was really cool. So I worked with him and, I did like an 18-month option on that. And they all put a lot of effort into trying to get the movie made. And it just didn't go at that time for, a number of different reasons. So it was kind of frustrating because like, I had spent all this time and I thought, okay, this is finally like my big shot. Everything's finally coming together. Um, I'd signed this contract for a really great deal if the movie got made, and I thought my life was about to change. At one point, like I was on the phone with The Rock's agent because he was like considering it, and like it was crazy. And then like nothing happened. And I'd also done the dumb thing at that same time through a lot of these generals and whatever, and agreed to do a lot of like free spec work for different people to try and get different things going. And all of that just ended up being a ton of like wheel spinning and wasted time, and none of it turned into anything. And so like by the time like Aftermath's option fell apart, and like or they didn't renew it because it just was clear to them that the movie was not going to get made. And then all this other wasted time, like I hadn't written a new spec in all that time, and I was just so frustrated with everything in Hollywood. We had a 2-year-old at that point and another one on the way. And I'm like, you know what? All right, I think I'm done for a while. And so I just like ducked out of the Hollywood thing and decided I was going to go make a graphic novel, which I did. And that was very fun. And then I spent several years like just doing that and writing short stories. And I didn't do any screenwriting at all again until 2020 when I jumped back into it.
Yeah, dude, that's quite a ride there. Like, what was kind
It's
of
very normal, by the way. I just didn't know enough to know. Like, you really just have to like have the fortitude to stick stuff out. Like, there's so many like bumps along the road before you get anywhere for most people.
well, during that time, did you have, I guess, a network of like other writers to sort of like ask for guidance or lean on, or were you just kind of by yourself during this?
I did, yeah. Like I was like at that time, like there was a Facebook group that I was in with a bunch of other writers, a number of professionals, a number of people kind of at my level who were like repped and maybe had optioned something or whatever. And a lot of people who were like on the cusp. So that was cool. I was in like a fantasy baseball league with a few of them, whatever. And so we talked all the time. And like that was great to have that support network. But I don't know, even so, like I just was finding that like it was not enough, and I was feeling very exhausted by everything. Like it was a weird thing for me to have put all that energy into it, and finally, I think I just believed way too strongly that everything was about to change for me. And then when it didn't, it was just like the biggest gut punch. And so I just decided to go and do things for myself for a while.
Can you talk about your time away from screenwriting, like what your life was like?
Yeah, I mean, I just focused on my kids and my day job, which is like that was when like I started actually taking my day job really seriously, and that's when it started to become a real career and a good career, which created a nice life for my family for a while. And I met Jack Purcell, who's a great artist who's done a lot of stuff for DC and Marvel. He lives in my town in Massachusetts, and so we decided to make a graphic novel together based on one of my concepts that I had just never written as a spec. And we did that, and we raised 10 grand on Kickstarter and just put it out ourselves. With like, we were both kind of in this place where we didn't want anybody to tell us what to do. Like we were going to make it just completely our own way, for better or for worse. And I don't think it's my best piece of writing. Like there are elements of it that I really love. I think I kind of rushed it, and like I think it would have been useful to like spend more time on that. The constraints of the Kickstarter kind of like they push you to get like all of the book and all the goods out and everything as fast as possible. But it was cool. It was just like it was so nice to finally, like, the thing about screenwriting is you write these screenplays, and I'd written a ton of them at this point, and if they don't get produced, like they're never made, and so they don't exist in the world as a completed work of art. And that was so frustrating for me to have poured all that time into things that nobody was ever going to see. So doing the graphic novel and just having something in my hands where I could be like, this is something that I made, that was the best thing in the world. And I was super excited about it. And then I just kind of, for that same reason, I wrote tons of short stories. I started a novel because, again, like that is a finished piece of art once you've completed it. Like it doesn't need $5-10 million in order to get produced and turn into something real. So that was it. And then in 2020, it kind of felt like the world was going to end between COVID and everything that was going on politically. And like, I think I realized I just wanted to know that I had really given my dream my all. It was kind of encouraged by a friend of mine, Mike Morin, messaging me and being like, hey, I know you're not a screenwriter anymore, but can I bounce like a log line off you? And I'm like, what do you mean I'm not a screenwriter anymore? Like, just because I haven't written a screenplay in several years doesn't mean I'm not a screenwriter. And so, like, I don't know, 2020 was the year where I just decided to jump back in. And that's where that reentry series that I did on YouTube came from, because I just didn't, I kind of felt like I needed something to hold myself accountable. And also I was overthinking this for sure, but I was thinking like, all right, so if I reach out to managers, are they going to be like, well, what's your commitment level really? You already walked away once. So I wanted to kind of just prove how committed I was. And I thought by like doing this 6-month YouTube series where I followed myself writing a new screenplay, trying to break in, interviewing all these people would kind of really make that clear how committed I was. That did not help me break in by itself, but like I learned so much from doing that series. It was a great experience doing it, and I'm really glad I did.
Was your mental health improved during your time, like taking a break from screenwriting?
Drastically. Also, like, you know, to be completely fair, like, I think so, you know, I got married young, had kids young, and I'm chasing this dream at the same time. And like, was time in there where like I really was not the best partner, like, because I was like so focused on, especially after I broke in, like these couple of years after I broke in, I was like working the day job and like trying to, you know, focus on all this screenwriting stuff. And I was so laser focused on it. I was not being nearly as helpful as I should have been, like around the house with our little kids and things like that. And so it was kind of, I think, really important for me as a person and like just for the health of my marriage and my family and myself to break away from that at that time too. And, you know, just kind of like have that kind of stepping back and recalibrating everything. So yeah, it was totally good. And honestly, like I've said to people before, like tenacity counts for so much in this world, and like sticking with it is really important, because like the people who break in inevitably are almost always the people who stick it out longer than everybody else, right? But like if you feel like you need a break and you're burnt out, like that might be very real. And I don't really regret taking that time away at all, like not even in the slightest.
Yeah. And I know, like in one of your videos, you talked before about how you've had dealings with depression before.
Totally.
Do you think that the film industry in this profession makes it a lot easier to sort of slip into depression just because of how hard it is to sort of get things done?
It's a good question. I don't know if that's true or not. It could also be that it attracts people who like are prone to that. I don't know. Like what we're trying to do, like even now that I'm a professional writer and like I've broken in or whatever, like there is no guarantee that I'll continue to get to do this. Like there are a very limited amount of jobs and a very limited amount of movies compared to the number of people who want to make them and who want to write them. And that's just the way it is. And like, if you are willing to commit a decade or more of your life to trying to do that with no guarantee that you'll ever do that, like it's not necessarily like the healthiest thing. And like, I think so like, you know, it could just be that like it attracts people who, for whatever reason, are so committed to their art, or like maybe like, you know, honestly, like have some sort of need for like communication on a large scale, validation in that way. Like maybe it attracts people who are prone to depression. Like I think a lot of people in this business deal with it on the regular. And so I think it's important to kind of have some awareness about that if you are one of those people, and develop strategies and tools to help work through that, you know. And also just kind of one thing that I've realized is how important it is. And again, taking a break was really great for this. It's really important to not let this be your entire identity, I think, because if you do, and you devote your life to this and nothing really happens, that's going to be crushing. But if it's only a facet of who you are, you can still work incredibly hard at it. But like if you identify as something much more and much broader than a filmmaker or a writer or whatever, then it's okay. Like it's you did something really cool. You went for it and you took a huge swing and went after a dream. But your person is much bigger and broader than that, right? And so I think it's important to recognize that. And I would say that when I was younger, I definitely identified like almost completely as this screenwriter, filmmaker guy. And now it's part of who I am, but it's not nearly everything. So it's not even the most important thing. Like the most important thing is definitely like I identify as a dad, you know? So and screenwriter comes a couple things down the line. So
Yeah, I know myself and a lot of fellow creators who like really identify with like movies like Whiplash about like, obsession with
yeah,
being like great and everything. So I think
absolutely.
you're totally right. Having different areas. What are some other areas like of your life that you like? Like, do you have any other types of hobbies that you like to do other than
Yeah,
writing?
for sure. I mean, I love, so we live right on the edge of a mountain. And like I love getting out on that mountain and trail running, hiking, mountain biking, all that. I took my kids camping up there the other night. Just love spending time outdoors. Um, that's a big thing for me for sure. I think, kind of going back to having a broader identity too, like I think of myself a little bit less as strictly a screenwriter and or even strictly a writer, just more of like as a creative person these days. Like I think that I would be a very happy person being able to be creative for my living, regardless of what I was doing, right? There are not that many ways to make a living like creating art. Like you can do it in almost any field, but there are fewer people doing it in most fields than there are in movies, which just goes to show how hard it is in general because movies are brutal. So I think it that's one thing that appeals to me about screenwriting is that like I can be a creative and I can make art and I can make a living at least for now. And that's really, really cool. But I love just, like getting to be creative in other ways. It's really fun. Even the YouTube stuff that I do is kind of sort of that. It's just like another way to be creative in a way that doesn't really matter. I started playing Dungeons and Dragons with my kids and a few of their friends this year. And like that was a blast of just creating these adventures for them. And like, because I will never get paid for that ever. And it's a pretty large amount of creative work and it's fun. And it's just like, and my audience is 5 kids. It's a blast. I love it. So, and so that stuff's fun.
Tell me what got you interested in documenting your second attempt to break into Hollywood.
I mean, it really like, I think the biggest part of it was like, I was trying to, I like, I think the way that I approach a lot of things in life is I'm like, okay, this is a problem that can be solved. There's a solution. Like, how am I going to figure out how to break into Hollywood? And like, I had the general idea that it was probably even harder in 2020 than it was in 2012. And it was already super hard in 2012 compared to what it was in 2000, whatever. Um, and so I thought like, all right, well, like I can put myself out there, document this. Maybe it picks up an audience. Maybe I meet people as a result and that helps me break in. Um, worst case scenarios, I'm kind of putting out a cool resource out there for other people that they'll be interested to watch. Um, I just was kind of trying to think through like creative ways to get the word out there, like that, I'm a writer who wants to write things, and to find creative ways to to cut through the noise, for lack of a better term. There's just so many people that want to do this, and separating yourself from the pack is not easy, and it's a tricky thing because like you don't want to do it in a way that appears desperate, and you don't want to do it in a way that appears crazy, and so documenting it just seemed like a way where I could kind of walk that line, but do something a little bit different. So again, like that was not really the thing that helped me break back in, but I did gain a lot from it. I learned so much from all the people that I interviewed. I learned a lot just from like the process of like capturing everything and recording it. Like there's something interesting about interviewing somebody, and you probably know this from doing it. And then you have to go back through and edit the whole thing. So you're watching it multiple times and like the lessons are really like sticking with you. I think it forced me to humble myself a lot more than I like when I jumped back in 2020. I think I kind of thought I knew more than I did because I'd already broken in before. And it really encouraged me to kind of have more of a student's mindset. And that has been critical. And I'm still holding on to that constantly all the time right now, just always trying to learn. And it definitely strengthened a lot of relationships too, which was I mean, that's always important and helpful.
And can you walk us through what happened during your second time breaking in?
Yeah. So the like so I wrote this new script during that reentry series called Aether. And like that's this kind of like dark fantasy horror that still has maybe a little bit of momentum behind it, and maybe something will happen with it at some point. I think it will. I love it. But like um it's something that it's just not as marketable as a movie like Aftermath. And I also had this other script that I'd kind of written in a few months in those interim years, but I never really did anything with it, called The Continuum. And so I took both of those scripts and I put them up on the blacklist and I entered them into a bunch of contests. The blacklist scores came back as like sevens, couple sixes, I think, on Ether 2. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, I was just totally confused by it because I really thought that they were better than that. So I was like, all right, screw this. I'm going to prove like how broken this blacklist system is. And I'm going to take my old script Aftermath and throw it up there because I know that that was optioned by a big producer. And like when that gets a bad score, like I'll have proved the blacklist wrong. And so the first score it got back was a 7. So it was like, ha. But I had ordered two evaluations and the next one was an 8. And so if you know what the blacklist is, the like basically like if you get an 8 or better, they promote it to like everybody. And Hollywood, not all of Hollywood, but some people in Hollywood take it seriously because I will tell you that the blacklist, they miss out on giving like worthy grades to a lot of great scripts. But when they do give an 8 or better to a script, it's almost always a really great script. And so people kind of trust it for that reason. So when I got that 8, I knew it was a big deal. I had a little bit of a Twitter following because of the YouTube I've been doing. And that's the one thing that like that kind of counted for, I guess. And so I tweeted it and I tweeted the log line for Aftermath and I tweeted a screenshot of all 4 pages of that review, including the weaknesses, because I don't have anything to hide. And I was just like, get at me, Hollywood, like, let's make this thing. And I didn't think anything would happen. And it kind of took off. It got retweeted a bunch. And then I mentioned it on another platform, Facebook, I think. And anyway, my former manager, Jeff Belkin, downloaded it, read it, got in touch with me. And he was like, hey, I know exactly who to take this to. But I have to do it like right now, if that's okay with you. And we can talk about signing later. I'm like, yeah, go for it. So he did. He took it to Tim Sullivan, who had just started at Voltage Pictures as a producer like a week before. And his whole mandate was to make action movies for Voltage in the $5 to $10 million range. And so he needed his first movie, and Aftermath was like a little bit more expensive than that, but not too much. And he got how the concept works. And so like within 2 weeks, we had an option. And it just kind of all went from there. And so suddenly this script of mine that I had written 9 years ago at this point and had completely counted out was breaking me in for the second time and had more momentum behind it than it had ever had. So that was pretty wild and a lot of fun.
How long was the process between getting it optioned and then it actually going into production?
Very fast, like lightning quick. This is not normal. But I think I signed the option at either the end of July or beginning of August in 2021. And we were in production on May 5th of 2022.
Wow.
So it was very fast. They, when I signed the option, like they had said like, okay, we have like, a polish that we want you to do. And like I agreed to do that for free as long as they paid me for any additional rewrites. And I had the first opportunity to do those rewrites. And so they agreed to that. And so then they gave me the notes and it was like way more than a polish. The producer even apologized. He's like, we thought we were going to do something different, but now it's a different direction. So what was cool is they hooked me up with a co-producer credit in exchange for that. So I went and did a huge rewrite on that. Rewrote like 60% of it. They loved what I did, and then hired me for like 2 more smaller rewrites. All of that was done by December of that year. And then we brought Patrick Lucier on to direct in December. And we were up and Dylan signed on to Dylan Sprouse signed on to star in December as well. And so then we were up and running with a green light after that, and it was just went from there.
What are some things about rewriting, for studio executives that like a lot of writers don't know? Because I feel like there's a misconception that, you sell the script and then like that's the movie that gets made. Like, can you talk about how much gets changed from selling to actually production?
Yeah, that's not. Yeah, it's so anybody who thinks that that's the movie that's going to get made, nope, it's not. Ideally, you are working with people who have a vision for the movie that aligns with your own. But like, so everybody's got their own goals, right? So like the executives, they have to make a movie that makes money, or they will never get to make movies again because they'll be bankrupt. And the producer, their job is to make sure that the movie gets made, which means they've got to make the executives happy, but they also have to make sure that there is a script there that like bankable director is going to attach to, and that bankable stars are going to attach to it. So they're going to focus on, getting it ready for those people as well. And so you kind of get like notes from a couple different angles, and your job is to take those notes and figure out how to make as good of a script as possible based on what you wrote, and then those notes, and kind of working it all together. Like now that having gone through that, like I kind of think of a spec script now as less the completed script and more of like a sales document for like just a great example of how awesome this movie could be, because I recognize that as more people come and get involved, there are going to be a lot of changes. And I was very fortunate that like the people that I was working with, they were really receptive when I had like thoughts on their notes. So like there were some notes that it was like, yeah, I thought about this. I don't think it's going to work for XYZ reason. I can try it, but like, what if we did this instead? Or like, if we're executing this, maybe this works all by itself anyway. And so they would be like, for most of those, they actually kind of were like, well, like, yeah, try it, see what happens. And there were a couple that were deal breakers. So it was kind of like, well, you got to get this done because we have to do it for this reason. It might have been budget, it might have been whatever. But I had to execute those notes, even if I didn't think that they were the best thing. So that was an interesting experience, because it's like, okay, I want to get this movie made. This is my best chance to have a career. I don't get these notes. So going back to kind of like, just always trying to approach things is like, this is a problem that has a solution. I was like, all right, I'm going to be a professional writer, and I'm at least going to pretend that I'm one. And I'm going to find the solution for this note that makes me just as happy as it makes them. And so, I banged my head against, my desk for 4 weeks trying to do that, but ended up turning out a draft that I think is even better than the one that I optioned. But it was part of why I had to write 60 new pages, because I had to undo a lot of what was there in order to get those notes in and make them work, and also make me feel like the story was firing on all cylinders. And everybody was super happy with what resulted, and ultimately resulted in attaching some really great people and getting a green light. So, it's a good ending. I'm friends with Tim Sullivan now, the producer in Aftermath. But when I was first talking with him, kind of one of the first times we chatted about notes, there must have been something that he detected in my voice where I was concerned that they were focusing too much on the bottom line and the dollar, and not focusing enough on the story. And I think he picked up on that, because he was like, hold on, man, we still want to make a really good movie here. And I was like, okay, that's good to hear from the producer. Everybody's in this for the same reason. Nobody's trying to make a bad movie. There are certain things that you have to execute for different reasons, but very few people get into this business without being huge fans of movies themselves, right? So it was good to be reminded of that. And just, it's something that I've carried with me, that most of the people that I'm working with, they also want to make something really great. They're not just focusing on the commercial aspect or whatever.
Have you ever had to deal with the not so great people of Hollywood before, who maybe were in it just for the money?
Yeah, I've had a couple of kind of sour experiences, but like not for the like most of my experiences have been great. Like I think most there are people at kind of like this fringe level who like in the very low budget world, or like who maybe um try and puff themselves up to be something more than they actually are, but actually were not the people who really got something done on their own. Like that's where I found some of the more negative experiences. But like when you're working with people who actually do this for a living, most of them have been really cool. And again, just like just movie geeks like I am, and very easy to connect to on that level. And like we might have different tastes, just like everybody has different tastes. And they might have to like meet a certain budget or whatever, or like there might be any number of things that we have to do in order to get the green light. But at the end of the day, like most of the experiences have been really good because everybody's on the same page of just trying to make great movies.
What does good writing mean to you?
Oh God. Um, that's a tough question, man. Because it can like there are the examples of good writing, like they're so broad. Even in something is like screenwriting, where like we sort of have like a format and guidelines and stuff like that. Like there, good writing can look like so many different things. But I think at the end of the day, like good writing gets its intention across very clearly, and it like just sucks you in, and you find that you can't really you can't pull yourself away from it, right? And even that isn't the perfect definition, because sometimes, like especially in poetry, like sometimes intention doesn't need to be that clear, especially on the first reading. But like I think for the most part in screenwriting, intention's really important, because you're writing this as a document, again, like as a sales document, right? Like for somebody else to read and say, oh, this is a movie that we can make, and this is why. So if the intention's not very clear, then it's going to be tough for you to get anywhere with it. So I think like clarity, and like just for being engaging, like if I'm engaged by something and I can't put it down, that's a pretty rare thing. And it's a very special thing. And that kind of is more important than everything else to me when it comes to good writing. Because again, like good writing can be very simple. It can be very complex and literary, and it can be everything in between.
What are some common mistakes that you find in scripts that you read or scripts that you write?
So I think one of the most common mistakes that I see, and again, there's exceptions to everything, but I think one of the most common issues that I see writers make in screenplays is a passive protagonist. So like a protagonist who the story happens to them, but they're like they either don't have a clear goal, or if they do, they're not continually taking action to achieve that thing. They're working that instead, like they're kind of just flowing toward the achievement of that thing because of things that are happening around them. That is very rarely engaging. We like to see people who want something and desire something deeply, going back to Whiplash, and who are just kind of actively going after that thing, and doing everything they can to get it. That's just something that we connect with on a really primal level. And when that protagonist is passive, that tends to be an issue. And it's something that I often catch myself doing in sections of early drafts of my own scripts, and I have to be aware of. So I'm constantly asking myself that question, like, are there things that I can do here to make my protagonist more active in this situation? And what's cool is if you ask yourself that question as you're writing on a pretty regular basis, that tends to lead to some of the coolest moments, and most surprising moments, because like your protagonist will take an action and make a decision that's unexpected in order to achieve this thing. And that can be, those can be some of the most fun moments, both as the writer who's writing them and as the reader who's reading it.
What are some mistakes that writers make in their career? Not necessarily story mistakes, but like networking or mindset mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, so like going back to what I was talking about, tenacity is so important. And like, had I known better, like I probably wouldn't have stepped away from things. I would have just stuck with it and kept grinding. I don't think it was bad for my mental health and the health of my family that I did take that break. But like, just being aware that like this is so hard, and you think like, oh, I get repped and everything is going to change. It really doesn't. Like, it's a step forward, but like, I'm now a produced writer. Things have changed, but like they aren't stable. Like I'm constantly looking for ways to create new opportunities and put new irons in the fire. So it's tough out there. And I think like, as far as mistakes that new writers make, I think it's not recognizing like how much work is required. It's not recognizing the fact that like, unfortunately, just because of how it works, like you're not that special if you've been writing for 8 years and have written 10 screenplays. There are a lot of people who have done that and who also want to break in. And so like the finding ways to cut through all that noise and stand out are really important. And it's tricky because again, you don't want to come across as desperate and you don't want to come across as crazy. So finding a way to like to stand out and do something different is important. Or sometimes people really respond to like just very clearly seeing that you are day after day after day doing the work. But the biggest thing that you can do to stand out, like, is probably just concept. Like, I think so many writers, they put all this time, they'll put a year and a half into writing and rewriting a screenplay and getting it as good as possible. But they did it with a concept. And like, even like the one that I did during the reentry series, like they do it with a concept that's very tough to sell. Doesn't mean that screenplay is not good. Screenplay could be amazing. And it doesn't mean that it couldn't make a good movie. It could make an amazing movie. But if you consider, so like, it's pretty normal for a manager to get 50 queries a day. And if you consider that they're getting 50 queries a day, like they're not reading those closely and thinking through them closely, because their most important part of their job is getting their clients that they already have work, right? So those log lines need to pop and those concepts need to come across as like, oh, this is something that I can give to this person right now and they'll want to read and make, right? And so Aftermath, the reason that broke me in twice is because you could very easily pitch that as Die Hard on a bridge and like everybody gets it. And they're like, okay, I can see how that works as a movie. I can see how you can make that for a reasonable budget and people would want to see it. And like, it doesn't have to be an action thriller. But like, you should have a concept that just pops in that same way where everybody's like, oh, I totally get that. If you've watched our like Spot the Pro series at all that we've been doing on YouTube, we're dropping another episode tomorrow, and you're going to see one of the guests on that, who's a manager, Mitchell Bendersky. You're going to see his eyes pop when we read one of the log lines from one of the amateurs, because it's not that common for writers to have great concepts to back up their great screenplays. And when they do, it's like exciting for people. And that's your goal as a new writer, in addition to writing, to developing your craft, being able to write something great, which is critical. Obviously, you need concepts that are going to get people really excited in order to get them to even read you in the first place. Once you get people reading you, there's room for those other things. Like, that's how I got producers attached to Ether, which is, again, a little bit more niche. But if I hadn't gotten things going with Aftermath, that might never have happened. So the concept is really important.
One of the things I personally struggle with, and ones that I see like a lot on like feedback forums, is how to create strong characters. Do you have any tips or ideas of how to beef up your characters a bit more?
That's a great question. It's different every time. However, like sometimes like the answer is more simple than you would think it would be. So I often think about what my friend Dalen Musson said when I interviewed him for that reentry series I did almost 4 years ago now, like just about 4 years, where he said, everything you need to know from about character, you can learn from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Now, when we were young, Dalen and I, like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle cartoon, like had a theme song where it was like, Michelangelo is cool. And like, or Raphael is cool. Michelangelo is a party dude. Leonardo leads. Donatello does machines, right? And it's like, it's just one line for each of them, right? But you instantly can like hang a hook on those character pieces and kind of build out like what that character is going to be from that. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't know your character's backstory, but like if you kind of just like have something clean that encapsulates who they are, you can really write them pretty well. And then when you're writing a specific story, your job is to just figure out, what does this character want? Like, and like, what's getting in the way of that? Like what, like inside of them, like what's their flaw? And like, what do they need to learn about themselves in order to overcome that flaw? So they can either get what they want or get what they really need. One or the other. Right. And so if you kind of have like just a general idea of the type of person that like, and you can kind of have a specificity, I guess, about the type of person that your character is, and then you can kind of figure those things out. A lot comes from that. And it's really amazing how simple that is and yet how effective it is.
Have you heard of a YouTuber named Brandon McNulty?
It sounds really familiar.
He does a series on YouTube called Bad versus Good. So he'll take an element like bad versus good plot, and he'll be like, here's some reasons why this is like a bad plot. Here's good examples of like fixing that solution.
Nice.
One of the cool things that he mentioned about character, a simple thing, is to give them like a contradiction to make them interesting. His example is like a doctor who smokes, like makes a character, just that small thing makes them instantly a little more interesting. And then
it's ironic. It's kind of just like, it's unexpected. And it just kind of, it's like a hook in a song. It just kind of makes you go, wait a minute, what? Like, yeah. So, that's cool. That's a good tip.
Do you think that it's getting harder to be just a screenwriter in the film world today?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's true. And I think it's probably a little bit harder right now at this time on September 4th, 2024, than it's going to be like a year from now. But it's probably not going to get as good as it was pre-pandemic. That would be my guess. It's going to come in waves and fluctuate. Sometimes TV will be better than features. Right now, features are a little better than TV. But yeah, I think it's tough. I mean, you go back to the 90s and people were selling spec scripts left and right. Like, I mean, really like it was a thing. Like every studio and production company would buy 10 or 20 for every one that they made. And it was just part of their business model. Like they were like, okay, this is like, we're going to build this catalog and then try all these different things and see what works. Now that doesn't really happen. Now you have producers coming on board and kind of doing a lot of development up front, often for free. Like the writers are doing rewrites for free and things like that. And then like you try and attach people, directors, stars, whatever. And then if you get through all that, then maybe you get an option. You usually don't get a flat sale. And then like maybe if you've optioned something to a place that actually finances movies, maybe you have a 1 in 5 shot of getting it made. But like to get to that point is so hard already, because just getting those directors and actors and things like that to sign on before you've actually got financing in place is very, very challenging. So it's really tough as a spec writer. Assignments have also dried up. There are way fewer of them than there used to be.
Could you tell me what are assignments?
So assignments, like they can be a range. It could be a rewrite job where studios already got this movie in development, but unfortunately the current writer they don't feel is working. Whether that's true or not, who knows, but they don't feel they're working. So they fire them and they hire another writer, and they hire them to do a rewrite. And that's pretty common, but less common than it used to be. There are also open writing assignments where, producer A or studio B has optioned the rights to a book and they need a writer to come in and adapt it, or a video game or a board game or toy or whatever. So there are assignments like that. And those still exist, but again, there are fewer of them than there used to be because there's less development than there used to be. And so that's tough. So like these are major sources of screenwriter income, and there's less of it. So yeah, I mean, it's harder than it used to be. I've made my year work by, I'm writing on an assignment right now for a screenplay for an indie producer, but like I did a bunch of random freelance writing this year as well that wasn't screenwriting in order to just kind of make ends meet, and it worked. And I've got a lot of great irons in the fire, specs of mine that are being read by top names. But does that mean that any of them are going to get made? There's no guarantee. So you're constantly hustling to try and get new things going.
I know in one of your videos you talked about quitting your day job to be a full-time writer. Could you walk us through how that's been going?
I mean, it's going. It was scary, and my timing was terrible. So initially, Aftermath's coming out this fall, finally, and initially I was told it was going to be out in like May or June of 2023. So way different. And I had a job where my boss was awesome. And it was a really I was treated really well, and I knew that it was going to be very hard for him to replace me quickly. So I decided I decided to give him a bunch of notice that I was going to quit so that he could hire somebody, and that I would leave on really good terms. So if I ever needed to go back, that would be easy enough to do because I would have left that connection on good terms. And also just, I was happy to do him that favor, and it had the benefit of giving myself a ticking clock of okay, now I'm going to do this full time. What am I going to do in order to make sure that I'm set up for success? So then he hired that replacement in February of 2023. And by then it was starting to become clear that the movie was not going to come out quite when I thought it was, but I still thought maybe that summer, fall, whatever. So I wasn't too worried about it. Then April of 2023, when I'm quitting, it's becoming pretty clear there's going to be a writer's strike. I'm not in the guild right now, so I thought, oh, it's fine. It's not going to affect me. But then the guild communication came out, if you ever want to be in the guild, you better not work with anybody who could possibly sell something to a signatory. So it's okay, I guess I'm not working. And my movie's not coming out. And I had also just parted ways with my manager, which, by the way, great guy. It was just because it was very clear to me that we had different ideas of where I should take my career, just different tastes creatively. And after kind of doing a spec with him, it was kind of all right, you know what? I think I need to find somebody who is the right fit creatively, as much as I like the guy, and as good of a manager as he is. So I had parted ways with him. Strike's happening. And I don't have a movie coming out, and it's getting pushed back further and further. So there were 5 or 6 months of just, it's completely scary because I have no idea what's happening. And I just decided I was going to lock in and write as much as possible. So I wrote a brand new spec. I dug up an old spec, did 2 full page 1 rewrites on that. So I'd be locked and loaded for when the strike ended. And then when it did end, I ended up signing with my new manager, Spike Selden, who's been a fantastic fit. But by that point, the movie still wasn't out, and now it's last fall. And I had no idea when it was coming out, and I hadn't made any income, and I'm quickly burning through everything I had saved up from Aftermath. So it was a scary time until this past March, when I picked up my first major writing gig that kind of kept the lights on and made things work. So I don't know. I thought that I had been really thoughtful about how I was going to quit. I had budgeted everything. I thought my timing was good, and it still wasn't good. It was terrible. But like I had no other option, so I did the writing and I got things done. And so far I'm still managing to do it, which I'm very grateful for.
How important is community when trying to achieve this goal of being a full-time screenwriter?
It's so critical. Like, I mean, I mentioned at the very beginning of our talk here, like how, connecting with other writers was a big part of how I got better. And, I think I've just mentioned like the professionals I had connected with, but like most of my early connections were not professional writers. They were just other people like me trying to do this. And I'm still friends with some of them today because, I kind of sought out the people who were driven and focused, and who really wanted to get after it, and just give it their all. And so many of those people are now also professional writers. But like when we started out, like we didn't really know what we were doing. And so like just having those people that you could talk with regularly about what you were doing, share ideas, bounce things off of, send scripts for feedback and just swap scripts. Like all of that stuff is so essential to just getting better and also not feeling alone in the process. And then there's this side benefit, which I didn't realize was a thing when I was starting, but like as somebody from your crew gets successful, you get this first, like, you get this bird or this like close-up view of that, right? Which is so cool because you see how it works. You get to peek behind the curtain a little bit. That's inspiring to you, and it also gives you really useful information as you're trying to go after it yourself. And sometimes it even results in referrals because this person is a friend of yours and they've read your writing and they believe in it. And so all of that is a big deal. And connecting with other writers early on and just staying connected with them is important. The only thing I would say is if you really want to do this, you should be connecting with people who are also really serious about it, because there are a lot of people who do it as more of a hobby thing, which is great, but like a hobbyist mentality is probably never going to get you there. There's just too much competition.
You've mentioned before that this is a marathon and not a sprint.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice on how to avoid burnout or depression or get down on yourself during this long period that you're chasing this?
I don't know if it's avoidable completely. I really don't know that it is. Like there's a lot of heartbreak along the way. But like I do think like what I was saying, like having your identity be broader than a writer or a director or whatever is really important. And I think finding like so for instance, you've been making like some short films and stuff like that. I didn't do much of that, but I think that's cool. If you put too much time into that as a writer, instead of features, I think it's a waste. But like if you do a little bit of it here and there, like you get to see things of yours get made, you get the experience of seeing how that translates to screen. You learn a lot, you make new connections by working with people on it. All that's great. Your community gets bigger. Community is really important. Like again, when you get a rejection and you can immediately, screen cap that and send it to your friends and everybody's like, fuck them. Like, like that just, it helps. Right. And like, so even if like, you understand that rejection is just part of the business and like rejections happen for a million reasons, it can be tough not to take it personally. And so like that type of thing when you're coming up is super helpful. But like somehow you have to develop the resilience to just be able to be punched in the face over and over and over again and keep getting up. Because that is how it goes. It's just how it goes for basically everybody. I know very few people who found actual success within like just a few years. For almost everybody, it's like really like a decade-long journey, 15 years more. It's really hard out there, and you gotta have that long-term mindset. And having a community around you is really helpful.
Do you have any regrets of any choices you've made during this time on your journey?
The only one is like what I talked about earlier, where I feel like I was too laser focused on it, like kind of during that time early in my marriage and early when my kids were like tiny and just not being as like helpful of a partner and as present as I wish I had been at that time. It was just the combination of like having just broken in and thinking I'm achieving my dream and like, oh, I have to go completely balls to the wall now. And it was just not a healthy thing. So that's the only thing. And I think like having like, if you ever find yourself in that position, like just being able to have a little bit of a reality check there and ensuring that you're also, being who you need to be to the people in your life. That's really important. And, hopefully I don't think I'll ever wind up in that situation again though, because I had that experience and then I had that, I stepped away and realized like, that's not who I want to be. And I prioritize things very differently, so.
What's the most important lesson you've learned in your life?
Most important lesson I've learned in my life? Oh my God. That's a tough one, man. I think, all right, it's just shooting from the hip here, but I think what I have learned is you're never going to be right about everything. No matter how much, conviction you have, you're wrong about something. And, trying to have that like humility and open-mindedness about that goes a really long way toward developing relationships with people, whether it's personally or in business, especially in the film industry, right? And so like I find that to be true in every aspect of my life. And I think it's really important to remember that.
Can you talk about what you're working on right now and where people can find you online?
Yeah. So I'm working on an assignment right now that I can't really talk about, but it's like an action horror type thing. I have 2 specs out kind of doing the rounds right now. One's called Linear, one's called Control. They're both kind of in this sci-fi action space. So I wrote a comedy thing earlier this year. So, hopefully you'll hear about one of those sooner or later. The 2 specs that are making the rounds right now are getting really cool reads. Not that necessarily means anything, but there's good energy and there's people excited about them. So maybe something will happen. But Aftermath is coming out this fall. I would love it if you would all go see it. Or I don't think it's going to be in theaters at all in the Americas. Overseas, it will be, oddly enough. But it'll be downloadable this fall and like for rent or buy, and then it'll be on. I don't think I can say which streamer yet, but it'll be on a major streamer after the new year, so you'll be able to see it very easily. So check that out, and then I'm on YouTube at NGD Writes, where I do things periodically there, and you can find me on Twitter at the same handle.
All right, Nate, thanks for taking the time to talk with me today.
Thanks for having me, man.
It was really great. It was really great to meet you, and thank you for all the wisdom you've given me through your series. It's been extremely helpful.
That's awesome to hear, man. I wish you all the best. I think it's really cool that you're getting after it. Just checking out your website, like I can tell, like you're really, putting your time into the craft, and that's absolutely fantastic. So I wish you all the best with it. And to anybody who's watching this, like, I truly wish you the best. Like this is a kind of wild thing to get after and a wild journey. It's very hard, but I will say, like, I've kind of basically achieved my dream, maybe not the stability part, but like I've gotten a movie made at a pretty big scale. And it was like totally worth all that hard work to get to that point. Like to be able to walk on set that first day and be like, that came from my imagination, and there are 130 people around here because of something that I wrote. It's just the wildest thing, and super fun. And hopefully I get to do it again. But even if I don't, what a cool thing to have experienced in my life. So I wish you all the best. And if that's what you want, get after it.